is that there is a direct line between what we saw, the intention behind Jim Crow, which was, of course, to keep in place a status quo. Ultimately, I don't think it's about race. It is ultimately about power. Power concedes nothing without a demand, Frederick Douglass said. Nothing, ever, right? So when we look at what is of course, race plays a big part of this, but at the heart of it, this is a institution that has been put in place to keep the power structures that have been where they are. The plot has not changed. The characters have, but the plot remains the same. And this is where I end, until the actors on the stage recognize that there is a larger play, that there is a larger scene that is taking place, you'll never break free of the narrative.
So let's hash this out, because you said a lot, and I want to hash it out for our listeners. Now, for the record, I agree with you when you said it's not about race, but it's more about power. So how do we justify that statement for someone that's listening, or even some of us that have been falsely accused, when we look at, let's use, for example, the crack epidemic of the 80s, when it has been documented that it was placed in the cities of Los Angeles. And then, of course, we know it spread against, which is actually an African-American community. So how do we judge that target action in a Black community in Watts, in Compton, to say it's not about race, it's about power?
I want to invite and challenge people to raise your level of consciousness. I mean, certainly nobody can deny the statistics as they are, that, 3 out of every 4 people that find themselves ensnared in the system in some way are people of color. It's no accident, right? No, I'm not saying that it is not about race also, but I want to raise your level of consciousness to understand that race is partly what is used, right, to blind us to the larger picture. When we look at those who find themselves powerless in our American system, more than not, it becomes us. So what we tend to think is, this is all happening because we're Black. Mm-hmm. What I want to say is, the same diabolical system that is incarcerating or ensnaring people of color at a higher rate, that same system will roll over anybody, and is rolling over any and everybody that doesn't fit the power structure. And the power structure is not white people, as it were. Mm-hmm. It is a few families who have held wealth in this country for centuries. And there is some ancillary benefit to being able to say, I look like the slaveholder. I look like the person that runs the company. I look like the person that's president of the country. But they run over you too. I had a cellmate, because I got to talk freely. I had a cellmate that said it like this. He said, there's 2 types of white people in this world, Darrell. You need to understand this. He was a 74-year-old Black man from Alabama. He would always say, I think differently than you. I don't have a filter. And I said, what do you mean there's 2 different white people? He said, there's mighty whitey. Those are the ones that are running things. And it's all the other ones that are running around think that they are a part of that structure. And he said, you could start as a mighty whitey and end up in here with us. And I laughed at it, because the truth of the matter is, the power structure is most interested in keeping the structure exactly as is. And it will use race, it will use gender, ask Christine Blasey Ford, right? It will use any and everything that is needed at the forefront. It doesn't mean that it's not really using those things, but the goal is what the goal was initially, even with transatlantic slavery, which was wealth, power, influence, and dominance.
Wow.
And can I just say a little bit further? If white folk, I know I probably shouldn't say it like that, but I don't know another way to do it. Caucasian people, and I mean this in the best way, right? If they understood what this was really about, the whole thing would kind of collapse pretty quickly. because they would recognize that it's only 1% of 1% that are actually in the power structure. And what's the old saying with the Nazis? They said they came for the gays and I said nothing, and they came for the communists and I said nothing, talking about the Nazis, and they came for the political dissidents and I said nothing, and then they came for me and there was nobody left for me. You better wake up. You better wake up. That these laws and the things that are ensnaring people, I knew some folks, and this will be the last story I'll tell. It was a guy on the inside. He had been a general. He had been a general in the military, and now a white man, and now he found himself in prison. And he was angry. He was angry. He was angry about everything that had transpired. He was angry about how could they do this to me? How could they not respect my rights? Because he was seeing himself on the other end. I mean, he had been in the power structure, and the way that his case went, I mean, it was really crazy, right? And it was another person who was listening that said, and I'm going to, give you the G-rated version, of course, out of respect. He says, I don't want to hear you sitting there talking because you were one of those people watching the TV 10 years ago and said, lock all them N-words up, lock them up. Mm-hmm. And you were probably watching the TV then. He said, but you didn't think that you'd be in here with us 20 years later.
Wow. Yeah. Listen, man, you talking some stuff. Now I've heard you do this before, but I think this is the realest and this is the kind of talk that I wanted.